I think our scriptures, our experience and our common sense tell us that we will not always, for all time, experience prosperity and happiness. But we do proclaim that Christmas is a time of joy. I don't actually have a Bible verse that says you will be joyful at Christmas. Probably because I actually don't have a Bible verse that insists that we celebrate Christmas. It's not there. God created a number of festivals for his people, the Hebrews, to help them with the almost discipline of celebration. He commanded a party. Go figure. I'd be okay with a few more commands like that. But he set these up for his people because he knew that telling the story and celebrating together allowed his people to come together and to worship him. And the Christians clearly took that on and made that a part of their own traditions. And I'm certainly glad for that. We're going to go back and read from Luke chapter 1. We're going to read something of Mary's song. And our message today will really just give us an opportunity to have a read of that and see what she has to teach us about the joy in which we can revel in our God. So if you decide to pick that up from your Bibles, it's in Luke chapter 1 from verse 46, or you can follow along the screen. They're pretty similar versions. The words won't be too different for you. And I can barely see that screen. Give me a moment. And Mary said, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God, my Saviour." That's how she begins. I'm going to tease you by doing it a little bit at a time. You know, Mary's human circumstances at this point, when she gives this song, "My soul glorifies the Lord," aren't exactly ideal. She's visiting her cousin Elizabeth. This is a famous painting recounting that moment. I have no doubt it looked nothing like this. But to be fair, the painters of times gone by have actually been theologians and have had something to say to their people and their culture about what was happening. And so we have these glorious paintings, if not a snapshot of ancient Israel's time, but certainly done as a piece of worship to our God and telling the story of what he did. That, and I'm bragging because I've seen some of these paintings and I just love them. So her circumstances weren't so good and she was visiting Elizabeth. Maybe she was sent to them because Elizabeth and her husband were the respectable older relatives who could keep her safe and out of trouble for a few months. But Mary's song is not one of sorrow. She's not looking for God to take away the scandal, or dare I presume it, the symptoms of pregnancy. She just delights in God. She rejoices and is filled with joy because she knows, loves and trusts God. She's just delighting in who God is. She's followed God all her life and is infused with his purposes and with his story. Maybe she recalls words like found in Psalm 37. It says this, "Do not fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass they will soon wither, like the green plants they will soon die away. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust him and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun." Maybe she's taking those words to heart. You know, if you spend much time on the internet doing very little, you will probably eventually come across some kind of article from Huffington Post. They're an online news, I use the word lightly, service that's very good about being everywhere in search engines. They had an article recently on 40 ways to find joy. Oh, this will be interesting. I only need to do a 3-point sermon. 40, excellent. And the article was by Mimi Fox. And what she does is she's actually recording a father's everyday experiences, trying to find moments of joy for 40 days. And he takes photos with his phone and explains what he's doing, playing with his kids, romancing his wife, taking time to just feel silly or enjoy a sunset. Towards the end of the article, we learn that the gentleman is going to bankruptcy court, and he's been feeling sorry for himself. He is prompted by a brave friend to stop feeling sorry for himself and instead hand the situation to God. He writes, and this is an excerpt of what he wrote, "I had to stop trying to prove that God wasn't real and accept that he is. I had to stop wanting to be right and instead want to get right with God. What's so awesome about all this is that he didn't stop believing in me just because I didn't believe in him. There's a real comfort in that. I surrendered. That is an awe-inspiring thing to do, to even think about that. It's self-defeating measure to fight against God's love, and there's no way to win with that method of thinking." We can delight in the existence of God. We can just delight and rejoice in the idea, in the reality that God exists. We can delight in his character and delight in his presence. He's here with us. Whether our circumstances are good or whether they're tough, these things remain constant. God is the one who is unchanging. He's also the one, no matter where we are, who has purpose for us. I want to read from Luke 48, continuing Mary's song. She prays or sings, "For he has been merciful, for the humble state of his servant. From now on all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is his name. His mercy extends to those who fear him from generation to generation." God is watching us. He actually cares about what we're up to. He wants more for us, more than we envision for ourselves. At this point, what has God done for Mary? What can she rely on, lean on? I actually think it's the history and story of her people. I think she rejoices in being part of a bigger story and thanks God for all that he has done for them. She knows the stories of what God has done. Promises to Abraham, deliverance from Egypt, a kingdom of prosperity, mercy after judgment from the Babylonians, and people still united and still surviving as a people, even under a really difficult occupation. She has the inheritance of her people, and these stories of God's faithfulness swirl in her mind and her consciousness, no matter how difficult things become. You know, it's God's command, both specifically and more broadly from what he's taught us, to share this story of God's goodness with the next generation. Perhaps the most familiar reminder of that is from Deuteronomy chapter 6. It reads this: "These commandments that I give to you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of the houses of your gates." There's some Sunday school craft ideas there on your forehead. Jesus reminds his disciples of the importance of children. We read in Mark chapter 9, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who has sent me." Now, if you want to experience both obedience to God and joy in the process, tell the story of God's goodness and tell it to the next generation. Why especially kids? Why is there something special about sharing this good news with kids? God was actually pretty specific about this instruction in a culture that would have been on board with the expression children should be seen and not heard. There must have been something that God was trying to do. Perhaps it's that kids are learning about life and how the world works. And so teaching about who God is underpins all of that. It's not separated and hived off into some kind of abstract philosophy class that you can go to when you're in late high school. If God is part of the very air that we breathe, so telling kids about that should be one of the most basic and natural things that we do. I think kids kind of get it in some ways quicker than we do. They have good instincts that they haven't learned to curb yet because of politeness. They have instincts that there's good and that there's bad. That there's people that are safe and want what's best for you, and there's people that don't. God sounds a lot to kids like parents, only who don't get tired so much. The one who makes things work, the one who provides things, the one that loves and that cares. If we as family and as church can create a loving community, we've actually already communicated something about God to a very young child. And if a young child has not experienced those things, then we as a loving community have our work cut out for us to explain that that's not how it should be, and that there is a God who loves them. Let me model what that looks like to you. Kids' wonder and faith remind us what our faith in God should look like. Jesus was trying to teach something when he was talking about coming into the kingdom like a little child. A child is able to have faith and accept love and appreciate that they don't necessarily bring a lot to the table. Spending time with kids actually reminds us about what this childlike faith that Jesus was telling us about, this trust, really looks like. Talking about this was part of my message earlier in the week, but I don't mind giving a shameless plug. The children's ministry could use you. If you want to share acceptance or the stories of God's goodness with kids who are under 5 or under 12 or under 15, then come and talk to me about what that could look like. But here's a promise. It won't be the easiest job in church you've ever had. I won't promise that. You'll have to fill in forms, do some basic training, and answer questions like, why did God make frogs green? But it might be the most joyful part of your week. I want us to keep reading from verse 51. Mary prays this: He has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their innermost thoughts. He has brought down rulers from their thrones and has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things, but has sent the rich away empty. These are really big ideas for a woman from Galilee. They're ideas from someone who's paid attention to the stories of God throughout her life. They're also ideas that are about to have a very profound impact on her own experience. She is the humble one who is going to be lifted up. She has been told that she's just a girl, that she's just a Jew, that she's just a country bumpkin. But in the future, she's going to be called the Mother of God. She will become an important leader in the early church. She will inspire millions who struggle to find their place in a very big world and draw strength from the example of her obedience and her joy. God is the one who can change the circumstances, who puts a twist that's bigger than the twist in any movie we've ever seen. He just shakes things up. Mary's son Jesus would go on to teach that defy your oppressors, not by disobeying, but by obeying them more and confounding them. Walk 1 mile, not 2, with the pack that you're forced to carry. When slapped on the cheek, offer your left cheek demanding more respect. Our faith is one of joy, and sooner or later, God switches the power balance that we've experienced in our world. Those who do God's work try to bring about this transformation now, but we understand that when Jesus returns, he will truly make it right. For me, this devotion to justice, to a kingdom that turns power on its head, is one of the things that I love most about being a follower of Jesus. It's just the thing that gets me. I love hearing stories and spending time with people who are about this cause, whether they know that they're following after Jesus' lead and teaching or not. I'm inspired by the news stories that explain that a London cleaner went to a bank shareholders meeting and asked if he could be paid a living wage, please. I'm inspired even by a Western Australian Christian hospital that risked their multi-million-dollar contract with the government in order to follow their conscience. This stuff inspires me in a kind of God's character, we take action feedback loop that for me is part of my delight in God and worship. But that might not be the thing that particularly stands out for you, and that's okay. God's wired us differently, and it's how he's crafted his world and his church. Maybe for you, the thing you love most about God is his constant presence. I find this a lot as I talk to teenagers. I ask them, what's the thing you love most about becoming a follower of Jesus? And the answer I've heard most often is, I like that I'm never alone, that God is with me always, no matter what's happening. We can delight in that, can't we? Maybe it's the way that God loves everyone. Maybe for you that acceptance when nothing has been done is the thing that you just want to delight in and just want to soak in. Maybe it's the creativity of creation. Maybe you're an artistic, creative type and actually being in this room right now is confining you and you feel like you'd rather be walking on a beach or something. Can I just encourage you, revel, rejoice, worship in that thing. Figure out what that thing is, if that's still a journey for you, and just delight in it. When we're talking about taking joy, that's what we're talking about. Take joy in who God is and what he has for us. I want us to keep going from verse 54. Got that there? Mary says, he has helped his servant Israel, remembering to be merciful to Abraham and his descendants forever, just as he promised our ancestors. Just as he promised our ancestors. God promised. He promised a number of things, including to Abraham that all peoples on earth would be blessed through you. That's in Genesis chapter 12. Mary was able to reflect on some of God's fulfilled promises. He promised to make them a great nation. He had done that. He promised to save them. He promised to redeem them. She would have grown up on the stories of when her kingdom was the greatest, under the rule of David and Saul. You wouldn't have believed it. The temple was like looking at gold because there was so much good stuff there, and our borders went this far. She would have grown up on those stories and of God's goodness. But still, imagine Mary wrestling with the words back in Luke chapter 1, but verse 32. So we're back to when the angel is announcing to her the good news. The angel explains, he will be great and will be called Son of the Most High. The Lord will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end. I would think during the conversation with the angel, Mary was still grappling with the practicalities of how she could be having this child. But still later in having had time to think and to reflect, she's praising God with so much joy because it's sunk in for her. She's starting to realise what this is. God is fulfilling one of his promises, that the throne of David would endure forever. He'd promised that. And the Jews had likely understood, well, David's descendants will rule forever. But that hadn't quite worked out the way that they thought it had. Mary's starting to realise, actually, God's making good. He's making good on this promise in a way that we didn't think it was, but maybe it's going to be even greater than we had expected. Her song of thanks isn't about how awesome it's going to be a king's mother. I'm going to get a crown and a little cape maybe, and I think even now she would be wise enough to understand that that's not what it's going to look like. There's going to be far more of a spiritual kingdom. I suspect, and maybe I'm reading too much, but yeah, that she had this appreciation even more than his disciples would, who were looking for things to come a bit more earthly. But Mary is able to revel in the fact that God is a God who keeps his promises. And we get to rejoice in that too. We are the fulfillment of many of those prophecies, many of those promises. But there's more to come. There's more to come, like Jesus will return and restore all things to right. We will be able to stand with Jesus and see him face to face. Won't that be amazing? We'll be in a place where there'll be no more crying, no more difficulties and pain, no more bodies that break down. Just enjoy God, rejoice in him for always. That's the promise that we look forward to. That's wonderful. And that's what we take joy in. We rejoice in God and who he is. We rejoice that he has a purpose for the next generation, and so we tell his story. We rejoice that we follow a God who turns the world upside down. Those who were once powerful, not so much. Those who were once meek or ignored are raised up and restored in God's economy. And even in an uncertain world, God keeps his promises to us. Our takeaway message is not some more work we have to do. Our takeaway is that we're going to worship, we're going to rejoice. And I want us to start by doing that together. Can I get our worship team up? Rather than closing in prayer, I want us to close in worship.